Hello, my name is Jonathan Keaton, and today I will be attempting to explain genres using video games. As most people know, genre can be mostly defined as a structure and conventions that something being created falls into. Within writing, this can obviously include such things as reports or journals, but in a broader scope, it would include types of music and such. If we were to view genre from a reader's point of view, or someone who isn't a writer, then we would look at genres as an outline for what is to be expected based on our prior knowledge of this genre. For example, Carrie Dirk begins their article titled Navigating Genres with a joke. What do you get when you rewind a country song? You get your wife back, your job back, your dog back. This joke to someone who doesn't listen to country music may fly over their head, but if you have ever listened to at least 3 or 4 country songs and paid attention to the structure and lyrics, then you may understand the joke. Country songs tend to be depressing and tell a story throughout the song. This is pushing the idea that for an average listener, they are expecting these ideas when going into that genre. Now, this isn't necessarily the same for a writer. As per the CCC poster page on genre, they lay out 2 important ways that a writer would understand genres differently. One way is that genre is a response to a situation, and the other is that writers understand that genres function in a larger context. Genres are a social response as much as they are a structure by which to follow when writing and creating. A writer must be cognizant that they are not the only ones creating and contributing to the genre, but that readers are just as involved. Creating a genre is not something a single writer does, but is a result of many things within the history of the genre the writer may be trying to participate in. I would also like to introduce another way of understanding genre as a writer, that no single text is a genre, as according to Bill Hart Davidson in his section of Naming What We Know, genres are enacted by writers and readers. It can only be an instance of that genre as it enters into context where it might be taken up as such an instance. Readers and users of text have as much to do with text becoming an instance of a genre as writers do. To clarify what this means, what he is saying is that an individual writer does not create a genre. Instead, genre is created by result of a series of actions over time. This means that a genre is not confined to remain the same forever, and due to this, I think that analyzing and supplementing these ideas introduced within this CCC poster page on genre using video game genres is a great way of understanding what these ideas may mean for a writer. To begin with, I want to lay out the 2 genres of video games I will be using to explain these 3 ideas and expanding upon what they may mean for a writer. The first genre I will be using is the FPS or first-person shooters genre of video game that is typically associated with the player having control of a character and viewing the world through the eyes of the character. Typically, the player is viewing the world from the viewpoint of the character's eyes, so this may mean that they see what the character sees, and so if they wanted to know what was behind them, then they would have to turn around. This genre of video game has changed and incorporated other genres' ideas as well as added their own ideas throughout the years since it began in the 1970s, but focusing on just the 3 ways we will discuss, this genre is a perfect genre to begin to get an idea of how a writer should view genre within writing. The second genre is the RPG or role-playing game genre of video games. A brief summary of this genre is that it typically allows the player to create a character within the world they are playing in. Whether that character is representative of oneself or not is up to the player, and usually the player is allowed to make decisions throughout their journey on what missions they would like to partake in and what companions or other characters they would ally with or become rivals or enemies with. This genre is another genre that has evolved throughout the years since its beginning, and it allows for a greater understanding when viewed through the lens of how a writer can use a genre as a social response. To begin with the idea that genre is a response to a situation, we should further expand on the idea that genres are a social response and are used as a response to different types of situations and the kind of genre that would be used specifically because the writer associates it as the best response. So, for an easy example of this, if your teacher asks you to do a paper on why whales beach themselves, you will probably pick a journalistic type of writing genre to do this assignment. This is because the writer will inevitably have to research and use studies within this assignment to be able to accurately respond to the assignment posted. The scientific genre of journalistic papers includes a basic guideline and has basic expectations associated with it that would prove useful for this student. When thinking of genres as a social response, video game genres and specific video games can come in handy when trying to understand what this means. Throughout the last couple of years, specifically between 2014 to 2021, the first-person shooter genre has shifted and changed almost completely from when it was first introduced. A very brief history of the genre will show us just how first-person shooters shift due to social responses. Arguably, the first modern example of an FPS game is a game called Doom. Doom had everything one would expect from an FPS game: guns, violence, offensive language, gore, and killing. This pretty much paved the way for every FPS game afterwards to include these things because of how influential and successful Doom would become following its release. However, where FPS games shift as a social response is when competitive gaming and esports begin to become a major selling point for video games. Arguably one of the biggest esports video games, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, or CSGO for short, is considered one of the most successful esports games today. However, a controversy surrounding this game has caused a shift in this multiplayer team-based FPS game is that the two types of teams the game has: terrorists and counter-terrorists. The whole point of the game is to either kill the rest of the opposing team or detonate or stop the detonation of one of two bomb sites within every map. This is obviously a problem when trying to market this game to a mainstream audience, because using words like bomb, terrorist, or kill are not looked upon nicely for a mainstream audience trying to watch sports. Another issue would be that CSGO follows the same routine that older FPS games did, in that it includes a lot of blood. So, in response to this, a new game was released on June 2nd, 2020 called Valorant. Arguably very similar in design to CSGO, the big difference between these two games is that Valorant fixes the issues a mainstream sports viewing audience would have with the game. It no longer uses words such as bombs, terrorists, or counter-terrorists. It instead replaces these words with defenders and attackers, and the bomb is now called the spike, and it doesn't blow up, instead it just turns into a black hole. The blood has been removed as well, and the guns are now no longer realistic looking and have fake names. On the opposite spectrum, there are new games within the FPS genre like Doom Eternal that actually take the opposite standpoint of trying to appease a more mainstream audience and instead choose to appease the old audience of the FPS genre. For example, this game doubles down and includes more gore, more violence, including the ripping of eyes out of the enemies and cutting them in half, has even more guns and ways to kill them before. This is a great way to understand that genre is a part of a large context, and that not any one writer will change a genre, but instead they will participate towards the future of the genre, whether that may mean that in the future a game like Doom Eternal is viewed as drastically different than what the newer, more mainstream and current version of the FPS genre turns into. Moving on to the final concept that a writer should understand when thinking about genre. Genre is created by a result of a series of actions over time. The video game genre of RPGs or role-playing games is then a great genre to use when discussing this idea because it has evolved and changed a lot since it began. A game that would fall into the atypical RPG genre is a game called Dark Souls. However, Dark Souls is also a game that has created its own genre. It has everything a typical RPG game has: creation of a character, a large game world to explore, classes and archetypes a character falls into, and long quests or journey to save the world. However, the way that Dark Souls has created its own genre is in part due to a social response that video games are too easy and explain too much, but also due to the mechanics the game includes. The game has a health bar that does not regenerate, a stamina bar that confines the character to only a certain number of attacks at a time, difficult bosses, and a story that isn't explained in a traditional way. These things are a part of every Dark Souls game, and because fans of Dark Souls love the series so much, it has spawned other similar games that follow and copy the mechanics present in every Dark Souls game. This in turn has created a brand new genre of video games called the Souls-like genre, and even though most of these games also fall into the RPG categorization, they are imitating Dark Souls more than other RPG games. This means that through the repetition of these mechanics presented in these Souls-like games, a new genre has been created from an older genre. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video on genre, and I hope this has been helpful in gaining a better understanding of the ways a writer should be viewing genres.